What did we do last lesson? Why activating learning needs a mini MMM. Okay, who can tell me, what did we do last lesson? Have you ever started a lesson by asking that question? You're definitely not alone. I see this all the time, especially in secondary lesson plans, and it feels like the right thing to do. But activating learning or activating prior knowledge is so much more than that. And actually, the way we rush this stage often explains why students struggle to take ownership of the lesson later on. Imagine you're the student. You're in a secondary school. It might be 2 or 3 days since your last lesson in this subject. And since then, you've had several other subject lessons, spoken mostly in your home language, possibly switched between 2 or 3 other languages. And you've just come in from a break where you were talking about your weekend plans. Your brain has been everywhere. So when the teacher asks, "What did we do last lesson?" there's usually only one confident student who will answer, the teacher nods, and everyone else stays exactly where they were. The question doesn't refocus attention. The question doesn't reactivate key vocabulary. And the question doesn't bring English back to the front of the brain. And yet we move straight on. Why do secondary teachers cut this stage short? Here's where I really want to acknowledge something important. Secondary teachers are usually following a scheme of work, working through a unit or a module and using a coursebook that looks very structured. And there's often this assumption that they've got the book, they'll get back into it quickly. But they don't. Having a book doesn't mean the learning is active again. And at the same time, teachers are under real pressure to keep pace with the course, to get through the material, to complete everything in the unit. So the activating learning stage is often the first thing to be shortened. Ironically, that's the stage that would make the rest of the lesson work better. Not just this lesson, but the future lessons as well. This is where I find it really helpful to think of the activating learning stage as a super mini MMM cycle. Not a full lesson, just 5 intentional minutes. First, learners need to meet the language and the ideas again. Not explain them, not perform them, just re-encounter them. And that might look like an image from the previous lesson, some key vocabulary on the board, a short statement to read and think about, or quiet thinking time. This allows learners to recognise, to reconnect, and to re-enter the lesson cognitively and linguistically, and that's real activation. Next, learners need to do something small with the language. This could be matching vocabulary to meanings, or deciding if statements are true or false, or ordering ideas from the last lesson, completing sentence stem. This manipulation brings the language back into working memory. It gives everyone a way in. It reduces that reliance on the same confident voices. Now, the whole class is thinking again. And the last minute of this little MMM cycle would be when we move to output. So the learners are now ready to explain one idea to a partner, to answer a question using a frame, or to summarise a key point, because the language is already warm. And this is where ownership starts. Those 5 minutes make the rest of the lesson so much more effective. When we rush activating learning, we often end up teaching the book rather than teaching the students in front of us. Slowing down at the start isn't losing time. It allows learners to engage more deeply. It allows learners to use language more confidently. It allows learners to eventually make the learning their own. which ironically helps us move faster later. So activating learning isn't a quick recall question, it's a process. A short, purposeful mini MMM that brings learners back into the language, reconnects ideas, and prepares them to take ownership of what comes next. 5 good minutes here can change everything that follows. If you're a secondary teacher, I'd love to know what pressures make it hardest to slow down at the start of the lesson. And if you want to explore this further, I'll be sharing more about how MMM supports planning across whole units, not just individual lessons. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please feel free to share this video with anyone who's teaching. See you next time. Bye.